patients began to start healing in this very miraculous way. But when you were younger, did you do this? Maybe you weren't aware it was happening as you look back?
You know, when you look back at your life through any set of glasses looking to see if something might have brought this about, it's easy to find things. The only thing that I might say that specifically might resemble some form of healing was that once when I don't know how old I was, I'm sure I was, 12, 13, 14-ish, I took a silver mind control free presentation or weekend, and I learned how to take people back to help them fall asleep if they had problems with falling asleep or to get rid of headaches. So, I mean, I played with that approach, and that was interesting. But outside of that, no, not really. And, let's face it, how many people go to Silva, and Silva is a wonderful thing, and learn how to play with that. So I don't think that was anything special or unique. It wasn't like, for instance, if you really want to go back, it's not necessarily me playing with it, but, I think I've told you before that my mother died giving birth to me.
Yes.
And came back to life. And so she had that entire life after death experience that she recalls, and it was quite unique. I mean, to this day, it has not only freed her from a fear of death, but most people who've heard the story, it's done the same. As a matter of fact, it's the entire second chapter of the book of the reconnection. I can share that with you if you'd like.
Yeah, I'd love to hear it. We get so many new listeners, Eric, who probably didn't hear you when you were on with me back in June of 2007. So go ahead.
Okay, because I was planning on, I was doing my best to focus on not going back to what we've already discussed.
But, no, that's okay.
Okay, so, what happened simply enough was I was my mother's first child, and she was in the delivery room, and while she was lying there on the table, she felt and heard very loud motors starting at her feet and her ankles and then her knees and moving up her body. And she was looking around the room at all the other people in the room, wondering why they did not seem to be disturbed by or even notice this sound. And yet she was sensing that if it got up to her heart, she was going to die, and she couldn't get anyone's attention, and she didn't want to die, and she didn't want it to get up there, and suddenly there it was at her heart, and she left her body, and she felt herself rising up, and she struggled not to, but she found that as she was leaving, she suddenly started passing through levels of beings, you could say, or of our spirit, or of people who have already died or left the body. And she doesn't remember the first two levels. The third level was the one that was particularly uncomfortable. It was not at all a good feeling. And that was the level of beings who had taken their own lives. And she instantly knew that taking your own life is the only thing that we can possibly do that will interfere with God's plan, shall we phrase it that way.
Yes.
And she knew that these people were halted in their evolution after this physical life in that state, and yet she wasn't quite sure whether they would be there forever or eventually move on. She did feel they would eventually move on. And then she continued rising up through other levels, and finally she found herself along this lane. She was on this lane and being pulled or drawn in a certain direction toward a light. It was a very bright light. She didn't want to look at it because she was afraid it would hurt her eyes. And along the way, she saw flowers of colors that she had never seen before on Earth, and she was being pulled in that direction. And she finally did have to look at the light because it just attracted her so, and it didn't hurt at all. And suddenly she was presented before it, and her life was laid out before her. And although this sounds in essence as a contradiction, her life was laid out before her, and although there was no judgment, she could see that it was a good life. And she describes it a lot along the ways that Daniel Brinkley describes the life review, where she got to experience the different emotions that she'd brought to other people. And then suddenly she was given her... She was given the secrets of the universe. She suddenly understood why the sky was blue and the grass was green and the earth was round, and how war was a temporary state of barbarism that we will not be in forever. How absolutely, utterly ridiculous it is to send young men and women out to die for the battles of old men and women in government, and that we will pass through this. And she knew why we couldn't blame God for things that seemingly seemed to be something that God was the only one left to blame for, and how there's a purpose for everything, and everything makes perfect sense. And in that wonderful place, that place where we all return to, that where we all come from, she knew that the only one regret that anyone ever has when they leave the body is that those left behind don't know what a beautiful place it is, and that they mourn us. And the one regret is that those people that we love left behind us are mourning. And with all this beauty, she suddenly found herself being sent back to her life, back on Earth. And now for all the struggle that she did not to die in the first place, she was struggling not to go back. But she was going back, and she was told she had to go back to raise her son. And she had all the secrets that were being taken away from her. She knew she was programmed to forget everything, and she struggled as hard as possible to hold on to these. And when she was being wheeled back into her room and regaining consciousness, she told my father of her experience so that they could hold on to at least these memories and these understandings. And then she would tell some of her friends, but, at the time, we didn't have Raymond Moody or Elizabeth Kubler-Ross or other people who were writing these books, so it just seemed to be her own story until much later we found, these stories replicated in these journals. As a matter of fact, Dr. Raymond Moody will be speaking at the conference that we're giving. Now, we're giving 2 annual conferences on science, consciousness, and healing. We try to give one in the U.S. and one in Europe. So this year, the one in the U.S. will be in Los Angeles, October 2nd through 4, and that will have Daniel Brinkley, who I know that you know,
yes,
and his wife, Catherine, who's a wonderful speaker. Terry Cole Whitaker will be there, Dr. Joe Dispenza, Konstantin Korotkov, who's a researcher from Russia, Raymond Moody, of course, Dr. Gary Schwartz from the University of Arizona Research, and Dr. William Tiller, who's known for many things, including the Tiller-Einstein model of negative entropy.
You've got the heavy hitters at this event.
Uh-huh. We're also giving one the next, about a month and a half later in Amsterdam, November 20 through 22nd, with a slightly different roster. It will have Dr. Masaru Emoto, Irvin Laszlo, and I've just written a chapter in Irvin's most recent book, Roy Martina, Konstantin Korotkov again. Lynn McTaggart will be at this one, and Raymond Moody will fly out, but so will Rupert Sheldrake and Bill Tiller. So, yeah, science is stepping up and recognizing that something new is going on through reconnective healing. Something
you will enjoy Dr. Emoto, by the way. He's a wonderful person.
Oh, yes, I've met him many times. As a matter of fact, he's even more fun with a couple of beers and sushi.
Yeah, we had him in the studio, Eric, with an interpreter when he was talking about his properties of water. And, boy, he's done some amazing work, hasn't he?
Yes, he has. And with a couple of beers, he doesn't need the interpreter.
Interesting.
Uh-huh.
See, he was holding back on me.
Yeah, well, I mean, he doesn't always feel comfortable with it, so the beer relaxes him. And it's surprising what he actually does understand in the way of English. And of course, I learned one Japanese sentence, which I'll give you now. It's "Honto ni sumimasen, watashi wa hitokoto mo nahango wo shabarimasen," which means, please excuse me, but there's not a single word in the entire Japanese language I could possibly understand.
Good, and I had to trust you, so I'm glad that's what it was.
You do, but with Dr. Emoto, I'll tell you something interesting. We are going to do an event with him in March. I'm not quite certain of which dates they are right now, but there's International Water Day declared by the United Nations, and so we will be doing something at Lake Biwa in